For as long as I can remember, Christmas had been the most unsettling time of the year in our town. People celebrated it like anywhere else. The streets glowed with lights, the town square held its massive Christmas tree, and families gathered to sing carols. On the surface, everything seemed cheerful. But underneath all that, there was something wrong. Every year, one girl went missing on Christmas Eve. The police never found any trace of them. It had been happening for years. My parents, like everyone else, never wanted to talk about it. They said it was too sad, or that the families moved away. But we all knew. People whispered about it. How could they not? Everyone had a theory. Runaways, secret cults, kidnappers. Yet the most popular one was something far stranger, a shadowy figure that wandered through town late at night, choosing a victim. At one point I stopped ignoring it. That's when Emma disappeared. Emma wasn't just any girl. She sat next to me in science class. She loved drawing in the margins of her notebook and always wore bright yellow sneakers. The day before Christmas Eve, we'd been joking about homework. Then she was gone. Her parents put up posters and begged the town for answers. The posters stayed up for weeks, until winter winds shredded them into nothing. No one ever found her. This Christmas, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my best friend Adam what I was planning. We were going to stay up, watch the square, and see if the shadowy figure was real. Adam didn't like the idea, but he agreed. He didn't want another girl to disappear either. On Christmas Eve, the square was alive with light and noise. The tree was even bigger this year, towering over the square like some great sentinel. Families drank cocoa, kids threw snowballs, and carolers sang old songs that echoed off the buildings. It all felt so fake. The happiness, the lights. None of it mattered. I kept thinking about Emma. I kept wondering who it would be this time. By 11, the square emptied. Families went home, the tree stayed lit, and snow continued to fall in thick, heavy flakes. Adam and I hid near the tree, crouching low behind a wooden bench. Our breath misted in the freezing air. The snow muffled every sound. We waited. At first, there was nothing. Just silence and snow and the distant hum of the streetlights. Then, just before midnight, I saw something move. It came from the far edge of the square, out where the lights didn't reach. A figure stepped out of the darkness. At first, it barely looked like a person. It was tall and draped in a heavy black coat. A wide hat shielded its face. Its movements were slow but deliberate, almost as if it was gliding across the snow. Adam grabbed my arm, his hand trembling, but I ignored him. The figure paused near the edge of the square, standing perfectly still. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking, searching. Then it moved again, disappearing down a narrow alleyway between two buildings. Adam didn't want to follow, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I whispered that we'd be careful. We wouldn't let it see us. Reluctantly, he came with me. We slipped out from behind the bench and moved across the snow, our footsteps nearly silent. The alley was narrow and dark, the snow piled unevenly along its sides. A single flickering street lamp barely lit the way. Ahead, I saw the figure. It didn't look back. It didn't hurry. It just walked, its coat trailing behind it like something alive. Adam whispered that we should stop, that we'd seen enough. I told him we couldn't. That was when we heard the muffled cry. It was faint and short, like someone trying to scream with a hand over their mouth. I froze. Ahead, the shadowy figure stood in the alley, a limp body slung over its shoulder. The body was small. My stomach dropped. Adam let out a whimper behind me. I turned to tell him to be quiet, but the figure had already started moving again, turning toward another alley. This one led deeper into the dark part of town. We followed from a distance, hiding in the shadows when we could. The snow was thicker here. It fell heavily, as if trying to smother the town in silence. I couldn't hear the figure's footsteps, no matter how hard I listened. I could only hear my own breathing, fast and shallow, and Adam's shaky movements behind me. The figure led us through winding, narrow streets and past darkened houses. It was as if the town itself had changed. Nothing looked familiar. I started to feel lost, like we'd wandered into another version of our town, one the light couldn't reach. Finally, we reached the outskirts. There, at the edge of town, was the old abandoned house. I'd seen it before as a kid, but never dared to go near it. It had been empty for as long as I could remember. The windows were broken, the roof sagging under years of snow and neglect. The figure disappeared inside. Adam whispered that we needed to go home, but I shook my head. I crept around the side of the house, careful not to make a sound. There was a small basement window, just above the snow line. Light spilled out from it, dim and flickering like candle flames. I dropped to my knees and peered inside. The room below was colder and darker than I expected. The walls were made of old stone, and the floor was dirt. In the center stood a group of metal cages, tall and rusted. I counted 6. Inside each cage sat a girl or woman, curled up and shivering. One of them looked familiar. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, but it was her. It was Emma. My chest tightened, and my breath caught. She was alive. The shadowy figure stepped into the light. Slowly, it took off its hat and coat, and I finally saw it for what it really was. It wasn't a monster, not in the way I expected. It was a man. An old man, with thin white hair and wrinkled, sagging skin. But something about him was all wrong. His eyes were too dark, like 2 holes burned into his face, and his mouth twisted into a grin that made my stomach churn. He moved like a puppet with broken strings, his limbs jerking and twisting in ways they shouldn't. He opened one of the empty cages and dumped the body inside. The girl was alive, but barely. She let out a weak groan, and he locked the door with a rusty chain. I turned to Adam to tell him we had to get help, but as he moved back, his hand slipped on the icy ground. He hit the window with a dull thud. I froze. The old man's head snapped toward the window. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he tilted his head, his grin widening, and I swear I heard a crackling sound, like ice breaking. He started walking toward the stairs. I grabbed Adam's arm, and we ran. The snow outside was thicker now, almost up to our knees, and we didn't know which way to go. I could hear the man behind us, his footsteps fast and heavy. He was so much faster than he should have been. I glanced back once and saw him lurching out of the house. His face was twisted, his mouth open as if he was screaming, but no sound came out. Only the crunching of snow and the strange creaking noises that followed him. We turned down another alley, but it was the wrong one. The street was narrow and blocked at the end by a tall fence. A dead end. Adam started crying. I could hear the man getting closer, his movements unnaturally fast. My eyes darted around for something, anything. That's when I saw it. A massive icicle hung from the edge of the roof above. It looked heavy and sharp. I grabbed a handful of snow, packed it hard, and threw it as high as I could. The snowball hit the icicle square at its base. For a second, nothing happened. Then it cracked and broke free, falling straight down. There was a sickening thud. The man collapsed, sprawled awkwardly on the snow. His hat rolled off, revealing more of that awful face. His eyes were still open, staring blankly, but he wasn't moving. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. Adam and I scrambled over the snow and ran. This time, we found the square. The big tree was still there, its lights glowing faintly through the falling snow. I could see my footprints from earlier, like faint scars in the white. We called the police. When they arrived, the man was gone. The old house was empty. The cages were gone. The light in the basement had vanished. It was as if none of it had ever been there. The police searched the woods and the outskirts, but they didn't find anything. They said we must have imagined it, that our minds were playing tricks on us. But I knew the truth. I had seen Emma. I had seen the girls in those cages. People still don't believe what happened that night. They don't want to. But the disappearances stopped. Sometimes, when I walk past the edge of town, I look for that old house. I swear I can still see the outline of it in the distance, hidden by snow and shadow. I think about Emma. I think about the other girls, the ones we couldn't save. And I wonder if the old man is still out there, lurking somewhere, waiting for another Christmas Eve. I hope not.